My name is Sebastian. I'm working as a developer advocate for this company called IBM, and I do a lot in enterprise Java, so in the Java space typically. And well, some titles involved here with mostly Java things. But the most important information about myself for this talk is not on the slides, and that's I'm German. I'm from Germany. And this is why I talk about efficiency, right? Germans are known to be efficient, right? So you see this, fun facts about Germany, there ain't no fun in Germany. Let's go back to work, right? Okay. So what I will show you are 7 principles that you can follow in order to become more productive as a software developer. So I want to start right away. The first principle, that is embracing automation. Why? Because, well, automation is using the computer in the correct way, right? Because computers are not very smart. Computers are very good at doing very simple things, but doing them really quickly and really reliable, right? And humans, all of us, we're not really good at automation, right? Because humans make mistakes, humans get bored, humans are much slower compared to computers. So we are much better at creative thinking, at solving complex solutions. And what you should do is you create, well, solutions as a human being, you program something, and then you let the computer do the job. You let the computer do the automation. And the important thing is that automation can come in very small and very big forms, right? You can write a whole automation for a factory in order to create a car in an automated way, or well, you can do very small things in even an automated way. For example, shortcuts, like program shortcuts. And what I want to show you are some examples that you can do as a developer in order to automate more, in order to be faster. So what I will show you is like this, perfect, that is my IDE. I will show you some examples in Java, because Java is my main programming language, but it's true for any technology that you would use, right? So this IDE is IntelliJ IDEA, and this is what you can see, Java, right? Just public class hello. So what you would do, in order to be more productive, you would use some shortcuts in order to do some things, right? So with Java, if we do something like this, well, you saw what I did. Public static void main, right? This is, oh, thank you. This is a method we typically write in order to destroy the signal. In order to create the main method. And what you saw, I did not write that method myself. I basically used what is called a live template. And, okay, no, it's fine, thank you. And what I did, I created this. What you saw, just because it's faster, rather than writing this public static void main, you know, this just takes much longer if I would write that myself. So I can create what is called a live template, a shortcut. That's just one way to get there faster. And you saw another shortcut, system out print for Java. If I say, for example, you do this, right? And now let's do a few steps and then let's refactor the code. Right, like what you typically do if you're a programmer, you would keep writing code and then you would refactor things. So for example, do this, do that, do something else, right? So what you would do, let's say, we want to refactor these 2 lines of code into a different method, right, in your programming. So what you would do is you would create a method like private static, right? Private static void, do this and that. And then you take the code and then, you know, you copy, paste it down there. And then you would not forget to invoke the method, something like that, right? That's a typical refactoring action if you want to take a few lines of code into a separate method. So what you can, what you can do then instead is to use a shortcut for that, because your IDE typically includes shortcuts for these things, and you can automate that. So instead of writing that yourself, what you can do is you use a refactoring action. For example, you select these lines and then do something like right-click, refactor, extract method, and you can extract the method, like do this and that. And what it will do, it will extract that method and it will not forget to invoke the method, for example, right? So your IDE is typically smarter at doing these things because it will not forget things. And that's a form of automation, right? And also, once you've done this action for many, many times, you know, right-click, refactor, extract method, then you will get tired of doing always right-click, refactor, extract method, and you will see, oh, actually you can also do Control-Alt-M, do this and that, and then it does the same thing. And for that line also, you can Control-Alt-M, do something else, extract it to a method, and I have a very intelligent IDE. It will also suggest to do some optimization, but that's okay. And you know, now you can just be much faster at creating these refactoring actions because your IDE typically includes that already. What else I'm a big fan of in your IDE is what in IntelliJ is called live templates. What all of the programming IDEs typically support is to create an action, well, what I did with the main method, to basically create some actions to shortcut what you would otherwise keep typing all over again, right? So I use Java Enterprise a lot, so I use these annotations at inject, and then I need some import, right? So rather than typing, you know, at inject myself and choosing the correct import, what I did, I just used some shortcut for it to inject, for example, some bean, right? Or you write some other methods, like, for example, a post-construct method. You can create this, you know, using this scheme. It's a very small change, but if you keep typing that all over again, you can just optimize it further, right? You can create a live template for it and just be faster. Same with pre-destroy method, right? Same with if you want to inject an entity manager. Just these characters are too much to type all the time because you keep typing them again, and it's just faster to create that, right? And, well, the same is true even for bigger files. It doesn't have to be a Java file. You can create these live templates for all kinds of things. I use, for example, Maven to build Java projects, and if I want to add dependencies, like Java EE or, wait a second. There we are. Jakarta EE8 dependency, then I can create a live template for the snippet, and I don't have to remember the exact, well, the exact coordinates of this Maven artifact, for example. So in general, just create templates for what you keep typing all over again yourself. So that is one form of automation, to use shortcuts. Wherever you find them in your IDE, basically in your program, try to become a power user of these shortcuts of your programs. And another thing is the command line. Why the command line? Especially if you're on a Unix-based system, you can do anything that the computer can do by using the command line. And if you do that, you will be more productive because you can type instead of moving your mouse around, right? So that is my command line. And what I use the Z shell command line. Who of you uses Bash? Hands up. Okay, most of you use Bash. Who of you uses a different command line, such as Z shell? Oh, very good. I like that. A lot of people. Why? I prefer C shell. I mean, you can use whatever you're comfortable with, but I prefer C shell because of two reasons already. There are many, many reasons. It's more powerful, but only two reasons. First of all, you can change directories without typing CD, right? So CD for change directory, you don't have to type CD. You can just type the directory right away, and you can switch. And it sounds like a small improvement, but once you get used to not typing CD, it's a very big one. You will like it. And the second one is you can auto-expand multiple directory hierarchies by hitting tab once. So what does it mean? Instead of saying, I want to go to workspaces, and then Sebastian Daschner, the modern Java enterprise. You know what I do? I type something, then I hit tab to auto expand. I type something, I hit tab. So I say source main Java, right? But instead of doing this, I can say workspaces, Sebastian Daschner, modern source main Java, and I hit tab once, and it auto expands everything. And then I hit enter, and then I'm already in that directory. And once you get used to it, it's so much faster to navigate around your terminal rather than, you know, typing cd this, cd that. It's just too slow, right? You don't want to do this. You want to switch directories quickly. The same is true for shortcuts that you keep typing all over. For example, what I do here, Control L for clear, right? And you can define other ones. I have Control K for display the current layout, or display the layout in a tree, or a tree with more hierarchies. And you can just define shortcuts just to be faster. Display the current date and things like that, right? And in order to become really productive with the command line, you can define aliases, shell aliases. They're really helpful, right? Because typically, you keep typing things like, I'm a Java programmer, I use Maven to build programs, right? This one. So I keep typing Maven clean package or Maven clean install all over again, right? You probably know Maven, yes? Some of you? Yeah. So you keep typing that all over again, right? And then it's just annoying to keep typing that, or you define an alias to do the same thing, like Maven clean package, Maven clean install, or Maven clean install and skip the tests, right? That's what we typically do. Or if you use git on the command line, right? Then you type this all over again, right? Git status. Or you can be faster by typing git status, or git push into the current branch, or git commit. Or if you use Docker to build containers, you can use, you know, Docker builds, Docker push, Docker ps, by just typing that faster. And you will find many, many own commands that you keep typing all over again. And if you define aliases for them, it's very helpful. What you can do, as a tip, you can have a look at your bash history or Z shell history, and then you can sort them by usage, and then you will find the top commands where you should define aliases for, because you keep typing them all over again, right? So that, I think that makes sense. Then, of course, the obvious form of automation on the command line is shell scripts, right? Like bash scripts. That is very helpful, because how to write a bash script is very easy. You just type the commands that you would type on the command line, put them into a file, make it executable, and done. And then you can execute the file, and you don't have to type that again yourself, right? So for example, if you build your project, always, for example, by typing Maven clean install, and then Docker build, do something like this, right? And then Docker push. You just put that into a shell script and make it executable, and then you're done, right? So that is easy to do. Basically, what we want is more automation by putting everything that we can into code, right, as code. Why? So we have code as code. That is obvious, right? So the whole behavior, how our programs look like, is put into source code, right? So what is the advantage? If we have something as source code, then the computer can execute it, and we can store it under version control. So we can have it in our Git repository or Subversion repository to store it there, and then, you know, it's safe. We can have the whole history, and we can execute it. The same can be done with configuration as code. So configuration as code, like XML, like JSON, is stored as code. We can automate it. It's much easier to use rather than navigating and clicking around by yourself manually, right? Infrastructure as code is another thing. If you think of Docker containers like Docker files and stuff like that, that is infrastructure as code. But basically, we can have everything as code. We can put documentation as code, for example. If you have some plain text documentation format, You can put that into code and then make it part of your automation and create some websites or create some PDF and things like that. And you can store it under version control. So I would say you can put as much as you can into code. When I bought this laptop, it took me like 15 minutes to set it up, including all programs and settings and everything. Why? Automation, shell scripts. You can automate, especially on Linux, everything, and that just works very, very quickly, right? Even how you set up, different screens, how you open up programs and things like that. So that is very, very convenient. And a good mantra to follow is this 3-strike principle. So if you have an action that you need to execute manually as a human, then the first time, well, you just execute it, right? The second time, you also execute it, but you get a little bit angry, a little bit annoyed. You're like, oh, this is stupid. I should write some automation, right? But the third time, then you lose the patience. Then you say, no, I will not do the task. I will write some automation to do it for me, right? Like a shell script, like some shortcut, like whatever you want to define. And I think that's a good principle to follow. As developers, what we should also automate are tests, of course, and not just how to run the tests, also how to verify, right? So if you run some test, the test itself should verify whether that situation is valid or not, right? So you as a human, you should not need to look over it and say, oh, is this valid or not? Is it green or red? But the test should say that, right? And you can basically automate everything, right? And if you take that further, then you end up with continuous delivery, of course, right? So continuous delivery, the way how we ship and build software in a fully automated way by a fully well-defined pipeline that just runs and automates all these steps that are necessary in order to deploy our software to production. That's basically automation per se. So that is basically the idea. Now onto the second principle, next principle. Principle that we should focus and eliminate context switches. Because we probably know that computers, especially processors, CPUs, have quite a big penalty to pay when we switch the context, right? If you switch the execution context of a process, you have to clear the pipeline, it just takes, you have a penalty. But actually human beings also have a penalty if we switch the context, right? Multitasking as a human is a lie. It doesn't work. It's not efficient. Because you can only do one thing very well at a time, a single thing that you should focus on. And now again, context switches can come in big forms, like somebody coming into the office and wanting your attention, and they come in very small forms as well. And a small form of context switches is, well, keyboards. Or if you want to be productive, take your mouse and throw it away. You don't need a mouse. You're a developer, you only need a keyboard, right? So if you use the keyboard, you will be more productive. You don't need a mouse, right? So you see, I don't even have a mouse. So I only need my keyboard. And basically, what you want to increase is your keyboard usage. Your keyboard usage for the win. So you see, I use actually this environment all with the keyboard. And what I want to show you, I don't want to do any advertising, but I want to show you that's also important to get a proper keyboard, at least at your workstation or at your home office. And what I used before, so this is a nice brand. It has a German name, but I think it's from the USA. A keyboard with cherry switches. So that's very nice. So a mechanical keyboard, right? So the typing experience is much nicer than using a cheap keyboard that came with your computer, probably. Or now I use this. These are real force Topper capacitive switches. Also very interesting. So if you're into good keyboards, then that might be interesting for you as well. But basically the point is to get yourself a proper keyboard. I don't care which brand or which switches you prefer, but to invest some money to get a proper tool, because that's what it is. If we are software developers and it's our profession to do the job right, then we also get a proper tool, right? If you call any craft worker to do your, to fix your home, to do some manual work, The craft workers would also buy some proper tools, right? They also would not get the cheapest tools available because it's their profession, it's their professional job, and we should do a similar thing. So I think it makes sense to invest some money into a proper keyboard because you spend a lot of hours in front of that every day. So in the same way, I had a look at the Chinese keyboard layout, and that's actually pretty good because there are keyboard layouts out there like the German, where I'm originally from, which I don't use anymore, because if you look at the special characters, they are like weird. If you want to do some curly braces, they are not at the place where they're supposed to be, and this is why I tell everybody who's writing in English or in Latin-based characters to use the US International Keyboard layout. So if you type some English letters, Latin letters, then it's the normal US keyboard layout, and you can use alt graphics for the international one. If for some reason, I don't know if you need these in your job, if you need to type some special characters, like for example, this accents or the sharp S or the A with 2 dots and things like that, you can type that by hitting alt graphics and then just type right away all kind of different characters, right? Or of course you type the usual English, right? Including all the special characters that of course you need. But as far as I looked at the Chinese keyboard, that is very much possible. And now what I want to talk about is Vim. Vim, this crazy editor, but not the editor actually, but it's about the way of typing. Why? In order to eliminate context switches. So the idea is why it's more efficient to type on a keyboard the whole time is that you don't need to switch your hands. You don't need to move your hands around because they're always on the home row. What is the home row? That is where your hands should be, F and J, right? And you don't move your hands to somewhere else. You just keep them at that position the whole time. And what the Vim editor does, it basically has multiple layers, what is called, in order to enable you to always stay on the home row, right? So what is confusing about this editor, in the beginning you cannot type, right? Because you're in the what is called normal mode, but you have to type a special character like I for insert, and then you can type, right? And then if you hit escape, then you're in the normal mode again. And then you can move around by, for example, H and L and J and K instead of the cursors. Why? Because then you don't have to switch your hands from this position to that position. So that's this idea of eliminating context switches, even with your hands. And once you get used to that, it's actually very, very efficient because you don't have to move your hands anymore. And the other interesting concept of this editor is that you have composable commands. So if you say, for example, you have movement actions like move a word forward, or move a word backwards, down, up, you can combine it with some action like substitute or delete. Delete word forward, delete word forward, delete line down, things like that. And then you can just, edit your text very quickly. You can say substitute, word forward, and then repeat this action, repeat this action. You can be very, very quickly, very fast. And that is what I like about this concept. So it's not about the editor, it's about that way of typing. And once you get used to it, you actually want to have that typing experience everywhere. So this is why I use that even in my command line. So I have this Vim setting here as well, and then I can, jump around here and substitute and so on and so forth, which is just much faster rather than saying, okay, I need to, use backspace or something like that. So it's just faster to use it in this way and to jump around to substitute and things like that, right? So that is this idea. And in general, I want to encourage you to improve your keyboard usage, to use the keyboard more, because you will be more productive. You will eliminate those context switches. Another thing that you want to keep short is the turnaround cycles. The turnaround cycles, while whatever technology you do, while you do some action, and then typically you have to wait, right? Let's say you write some code and then you have to compile, So in C and other languages that took a long time. In Java, it's quite fast to compile, but typically you need to wait for other actions, right? Let's say you change some classes, you write some code, and then you need to run some tests. And now it depends how fast your tests are, and if the tests take a long time, then the turnaround cycles are long. And what happens? Well, you are out of context, right? So assuming I start some action and now I have to wait 20 seconds, well, what happens? I get bored, I get myself a coffee, I make a coffee, I walk away. I drink my coffee, I check social media, right? Because we are humans, right? We get distracted, we get bored because our context switched. And what we want to do is we want to keep the turnaround cycle short. So for example, what I have here is a Java project, a different one, where I basically have a Java enterprise project that answers something on, well, HTTP. So I can call some HTTP here on the command line, for example, saying this one, curl, localhost, and it says hello. So that is my enterprise application. It's just a hello world application for Java on this path, right? So it says hello or it says hi. And what I want to do, for example, if I want to change something, so this is this class, what I'm running here is an application server that runs in a hot reload mode. So it watches my file changes and it can immediately change something under the hood. So if I say hello exclamation mark or hello Shanghai, what it does, it will immediately redeploy and restart it. And that is my running application that is immediately changed. So if I change something again, let's say here exclamation mark, then it's the same thing. It will just quickly reload, and then I immediately see the change here, and I have that reflected, right? And the same is true if I, for example, want to execute my tests, and I run my tests here, and then I say, okay, it says expected a different test that I had. So for example, I can adapt some tests and things like that. So let's say I change this back, and then I can run my tests again and things like that, and then I see whether it worked or not. So now I have here 2 tests that are now green, right? So the point is, I want to run my technology, whatever that is, in a specific mode where it just gives me immediate feedback whether everything that I did, was intentional, whether it worked, right? So in this case, what I'm actually using is OpenLiberty with some plugin here on the Java side, so you can check that out if you're interested in Java Enterprise. But the point is, whatever technology you use, you just want to use it in a way where you get immediate feedback, where you keep that turnaround cycle short. Whatever you do, if it's like writing code, waiting for compilation, then make sure that that compilation is fast. And fast means like less than 2 seconds, like immediate. Or if you need to wait for some tests, then make sure that the tests run really quickly. Or if you need to redeploy, if you need to test a deployment, then make sure whether there are some like hot deployment actions like this available where you can just get the immediate feedback where the whole thing still changes within 2-3 seconds, but not more. And that's very important as a human to stay in that productive development mode, to basically not have that context switch to stay productive. So this is very important. The next thing, and you're laughing, yes, you should try to manage all of these distractions and focus. And in our world, there are many, many, many distractions and notifications. Actually, this one is the worst, Everybody of you has one of these, smartphone. Horrible distractions. You hear them all the time, bing, some notification, you got some text message or something going on. And the point is, it's helpful to get the notification, but it actually distracts you. If you want to do some work where you really want to focus on something like a complex task like programming, you need to be able to focus and cut out all of the distractions, because distractions will, distract you from the current task at hand. And that's very, very important. And what you should really try to manage and try to do is to manage these distractions and ideally avoid them. So I can tell you there's a really nice feature on your phone where it can improve your productivity. It's called flight mode. So in the flight mode, do not disturb mode, you will get no notifications, there's no connectivity, and it's great because your phone will not distract you. You can put your phone away, you can put it into your backpack, and you will be able to focus on whatever you're trying to do, right? Because at least for half an hour or 60 minutes, you can focus at the task at hand. The same is true for email program or Slack if you use that, or any notification, any messaging service that gives you notifications, just close it. Close that browser, shut down that program, and try to focus. At least for some time. If you have your coworkers or a team where you need to respond, well, then you can tell them, at least now for the next 30 minutes, I want to be able to focus, and then afterwards I will respond to your messages, right? Because it's an asynchronous communication mostly. You should tell them, okay, now I really need to focus, I really need to work, and then afterwards, it's fine again. And this is not a joke. Actually, I bought myself some, earplugs. Because noise, it's also distracting, right? Can be very distracting. Depends on the type of noise and depends on the person. For me, noise is very distracting, and also visual noise. So for example, if you are somewhere and then people are passing by, this can be very distracting, and you just want to focus and have some kind of blinders. And that's also an interesting thing. Working environments. Yes, this picture was taken at a Java unconference that we organized, and it looks like vacation, very nice landscape. But actually, the working environment is also very important, right? So I like that Shanghai is very green. It has a lot of trees outside, and it has nice views, which is important as humans, right? We are more productive if we are in an environment where we can just relax, right? And it's really important to us as a human being. If we have relaxed peace of mind, we are more effective because we work smarter. We can get that work done much, much quicker, and well, it's also more enjoyable typically. So a work environment, it is important actually. I don't know whether you can work from home or work remotely. That is also a thing. It has a lot to do with the productivity because of whether you're relaxed or not. That's a nice comic. I like this one. So this is our developer dude over here. On the top left, I don't know whether you can read it. Our developer tries to solve a very complex solution, right? We have some decision tree, and he says, okay, what about if I change this to that? And then, of course, you see what happens here. Somebody comes in and says, hey, do you have a second, right? Your coworker comes in and tries to get your attention. And what happens? Poof. Everything that you stored, that you build up in your working memory is then gone, right? Everything that you had in your temporary storage in your brain is now fully gone. You're distracted. You're somewhere else. And you're literally lost in space. And of course, the other person says, oh, never mind. It was actually not that important, right? So yeah, thanks. But this is where you get distracted. And actually, as a programmer, this is where bugs happen. Because now, let's imagine you thought about some important decision, important solution, and then you say, oh, by the way, I need to remind myself of this corner case, right? And if you get distracted just in this very second way, you want to keep that thought, then this is gone, and you cannot focus anymore. So that's important. So this is why you should try to manage all of these distractions and get into an environment where you can work well and where you can focus well. So the next principle for the productivity principles is, and I said that before, once in a while, try to take a step back and reflect and see what you're doing the whole time. So that is true, especially for automation. For example, if you find, okay, you keep typing the same things all over again, or you keep executing the same task in the same way all over again, then you can find some automation. Or maybe you have some notification, some distraction that always distracts you. Well, then you can try to get rid of it. And that's very important in order to become better. So for example, if you find that every day in the morning you come into the office and then you open up the same programs, or you open up your browser with always the same websites, well, you can write an automation for it that does it for you. So then you just need to start the automation, and you can grab a coffee while the page and everything is loading up. So that is also somewhat helpful. And these things are long-term investments, basically. So everything that you do there, every automation you write, every shortcut you define or that you learn, every testing, automated testing that you define, every tooling that you improve is some way of long-term investment that you do. It doesn't pay off immediately, but it definitely pays off in the long run in order to make you more productive as a developer. So principle 4, that's a funny one. The principle of don't make me think, or at least don't make me think twice. So if you notice you always have the same like thought patterns, or you always, make the same decisions multiple times, well, you want to apply this principle to basically make decisions faster or make decisions only once. So for example, if you think, oh, how again do I deploy to my production or to my test environment, right? And if you say, oh, by the way, I know I solved this last week already, if you have this déjà vu moment, right, where you say, oh, I solved this before, how does it work again? Well, if you documented it, or if you define some automation for it, then you would know. So the point is that you want to define processes and then automate. So for example, email, it's the same thing. You might have heard of inbox zero, of this approach. It's basically just a process, a decision process of applying. If, responding to an email takes less than 2 minutes, then do it right now, or put it into this folder, or put it there, so you always have a clear decision. And if you have a process, then of course you can automate. And automation can also be some form of documentation, right? If again, you think, how can I deploy to my test environment again? Well, you can have a look in the automation, right? Because that is a form of documentation, because how you do it, it's written right there. It's exactly the steps that you would need to perform, right? So that helps as well. Also what helps for you as humans is to keep a to-do list. No, really. I mean it. It sounds very obvious, but actually there's a lot to to-do list, a lot of helpful things, and in order to, well, help you focus. Why? Because I think the human brain, it's not a storage unit, it's a processing unit. You should not try to keep remembering things, you should put them somewhere. But there's a thing to effectively writing to-dos, I think, so especially if, for example, I always try to use to-do lists where, I put in everything that I want to do, and then at some point you have hundreds of things in that list, and then you don't want to look even at it anymore, right? Because once you open it up, you're already overwhelmed. There's too much things in there, and then, you close it again. But what you actually can keep is a very simple to-do list. For example, one just for a day, or for a week, or maybe for a sprint cycle, or whatever measurement you want to have. And it can be very simple. You don't even have to use a sophisticated product. You can have something like, for example, a text file. So for example, you can say, I can, using Vim or using any editor, I can do the to-dos for today, and I just write them here, and then I say, oh, for example, what are the to-dos? This is now an ASCII doc format. Do this, do that, do something else. And you just write them for the next day. And then, very important, you sort them by priority. And also, very important, keep a done list. So once you have done your to-dos, you can move them down there. And at the end of the day, you see what you have done, right? And you just keep that. So if your manager comes in the next day and asks you what you have done, or actually asks you what you have done the whole month, then you can very easily just say, oh, what you have done there, right? And the same is true for the next week, and so on and so forth. And the point is that if you then add something, if you go through at the end of the day, you're not overwhelmed with all of the things that you wrote down there, because it's just, that list is tiny. The same is true if I'm developing, if I'm, writing some code, and then I have a random thought like, oh, I remember I have to do this, right? And now if I would go to my to-do list application and open it up, then I'm immediately distracted, right? Because I see these hundreds of things that I have not done yet. So what I want to do instead is to have some functionality where I say, okay, I just added, for example, for me on the command line, do this super important thing, and then I hit enter, and then it's gone. And I can relax because I know it's later on, it's appended to the end of my to-do list, right? And I will go through it later at the end of the day. But the point is peace of mind that you then can relax because you know it's there, you know, you will see it later on. So these are just a few pointers, a few will help us in order to write to-dos a little bit more efficiently. But that is, of course, a huge topic on its own. But the point is you just want to keep that in a way that makes you, enables you to focus. Fifth principle of knowing your craft, like literally knowing what you're doing. And that means knowing the technology that you work with well. And of course that includes read the documentation. No, really, I mean it, right? So, for example, if you keep, trying and erroring your way around, if you try some solution and, oh, doesn't work, try again, doesn't work, try again. What helps in many, many ways is to just have a look at the documentation and read through it, how it really works, right? And the same is true for me. Many times I just tried it out until I finally had a look at the documentation, how it actually works. And then you usually see why it doesn't work. And then, you realize why that was the case. So that will make you more effective. Why? Because you're more knowledgeable in whichever technology you use. So then you really know what you're doing and, you can apply it well. Because programming languages get more and more abstract and it's much and much easier to write, simple things with very little code. Right? So in the past, we had something like assembler or C, where you had to write, everything yourself. You can do everything, but you had to write everything yourself. And then the more high-level languages you get, the more functionality you can apply very easily. It's just a few, characters, few lines of code. But the point is you have to know which lines of code you need to write. And in order to that, well, you should really be able to know what you're doing. You know your craft. And the next principle is communicating. So communicating that back and telling your coworkers, for example, what they need to do, how to use a specific technology. And this will also make you actually more productive because you will become more knowledgeable in that technology as well if you teach others. So that is very important, and it includes writing documentation. Yes, I mean it. So writing documentation actually not only in order to be nice to others, also for yourself. Writing documentation helps yourself a lot because, well, you can read that documentation yourself as well. And many, many times I noticed the same thing. If I wrote a blog post in the past on my blog, and then in the future, actually like two years later, I Googled for some solution or I searched for some solution and I ended up on my own blog post that I wrote, and I actually even forgot that I wrote it back then, but it helped me. And that's, the best example of writing a documentation for others that can help yourself as well, right? And try to share knowledge in all kind of ways. So sharing knowledge is a way of teaching, and teaching will improve and help you actually the most because it forces you to become more knowledgeable, and therefore you will be more productive. So now there are 6 of the 7 productivity principles. Most of all, embracing the automation and trying to focus on what you want to do and eliminate all these context switches. And there are a few more steps and principles that help you in doing that. So I hope you can have some inspiration from that already. And now the 7th productivity principle, which is use the save time to relax. So this sounds a little bit counterproductive, but it's actually a very important one because, again, we're not machines, we're humans, and this is a very important topic as well. If you're relaxed and if you're, if you're sane and happy, you can actually achieve much, much more, and you will be more productive. So it doesn't help to, apply all of these principles in order to become faster, to get more time, to, do even more automation, to become even more faster. So this doesn't end well, right? So you have to take a break, especially also as developers. That's very, very important to be more effective. And even as developers, there is no substitute for healthy diets, doing sports, and enough sleep. Thank you very much for your attention.